Hey everybody, thank you for joining us today. My name's Emily Mason, and I'm an advocate at Environment North Carolina Research and Policy Center. We are a policy and action group with the mission to build a greener, healthier world. Joining me today is Matt Abel. He's the Executive Director at North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. After our comments, we're then happy to take any questions you might have. Next slide, please, Jen. We're here to release Environment North Carolina Research and Policy Center's new report, Rooftop Solar on the Rise. This report celebrates the dramatic growth of rooftop solar over the last decade. It illustrates how far we still have to go in order to take full advantage of our solar energy potential, and it recommends policies to keep rooftop solar rising. About 40 years ago, researchers at the University of Delaware built the first solar-powered home in America. Before that test home, though, the idea that you could run a home on renewable solar energy was just an idea. Fast forward about a generation, and now solar panels that are on the roofs of homes and businesses generate power equivalent to the annual electricity usage of 5.7 million American homes. That brings me to the take-home message of today's event. Today in North Carolina, you can get your energy straight from your rooftop. Why pay for polluting energy from a power plant hundreds of miles away when solar panels on your roof can do the job even better? The rapid rise of rooftop solar is thanks in part to the researchers and the engineers who drove advances in solar technology, to the entrepreneurs who figured out how to make and install solar panels efficiently and affordably, and to the advocates and the political leaders who created the public policies which laid the foundation for it all. It's also because of the 3.9 million Americans who have installed solar panels on their homes. Every American who has installed solar panels has voted with their wallet and their rooftop for a clean energy future. They have helped make a clean energy future more possible, both through their own action and through influencing those around them. In 2022, the annual amount of electricity generated by rooftop solar in the US was 10 times what it was a decade ago, with 2/3 of that growth coming only recently since 2017. That electricity is being produced right where we use it, in our communities and on our homes. North Carolina also has seen solar grow. As of 2022, North Carolina ranked 16th in the nation for growth in small-scale solar power generation, which is usually rooftop solar, over the past decade. Residential solar in North Carolina grew 518% from 2017 through 2022. And then over the same time period, small-scale commercial solar grew 46% and industrial grew by 129%. In total, small-scale solar in North Carolina generated 594 gigawatt hours of electricity in 2022. So while millions of Americans have already gone solar, there's still plenty of room for solar energy to grow, including here in North Carolina. Sunshine is Earth's most abundant energy resource, and harnessing it has a big role to play in the energy transition. Solar on homes and businesses across the United States has the potential to generate almost half of all national electricity sales at 2022 demand levels. Rooftop solar can provide a large share of the clean power we need to end our reliance on fossil fuels. Next slide. But in 2022, North Carolina only tapped about 1% of its rooftop solar generation potential. That means about 99% of North Carolina's rooftop solar potential isn't being used. What a huge opportunity for solar growth right here in North Carolina. With strong public policies, millions of more Americans will have the opportunity to power their lives with energy from the sun and move to a cleaner, healthier energy system. In North Carolina especially, focusing on having a supportive rate design and ensuring access to solar for renters and low-income residents through community solar projects could help us reach this potential. Every rooftop without solar panels is a missed opportunity. Thanks again for joining us. I'm going to put the link to the page with the report in the chat, and then you're going to hear from our next speaker, Matt Abel, and then we'll take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Emily. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here. Okay, can you see my screen all right? All right, great. Well, thanks, Emily, and thank you to the Environment NC team for allowing me to join you all this morning for this briefing on your latest rooftop solar report here in North Carolina. I'm really excited and encouraged by the results of that report and the direction that the overall state of North Carolina is moving as it relates to behind the meter generation here in the state. And just a little bit of additional background before I get into some of my remarks about the organization that I'm here representing, which is the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. We've been around for about 45 years here in North Carolina, and our mission really is to drive public policy here in the state. We've got an internal policy team and some great external partners that help advocate on behalf of clean energy at the North Carolina General Assembly and the North Carolina Utilities Commission and our various state agencies and the governor's office. And we represent nearly 10 different technology areas. So solar is one piece of it. We're also working on issues like electric vehicles and wind and storage. But there's been lots of exciting things going on in the solar space. And so that's where I'll focus some of my remarks here today. Briefly, I'll use this opportunity to plug the Squeaky Clean Energy podcast, and I use that and I tee that up here because there's been a lot of changes in the rooftop solar market in North Carolina over the past 5-6 years, and so we've been keeping up with a lot of those changes as it relates to rate design, as it relates to rebates, incentives, and so we outline a lot of those changes pretty routinely on our podcast. So a great way to stay up to date on some of those changes. So Emily earlier sort of outlined the growth of rooftop solar here in North Carolina. I think it's always really important to provide some context as well around solar in the state in general. And so I share a chart at the top of this slide from our partners at the Solar Energy Industries Association as well, which shows overall solar growth in North Carolina and how that's sort of subdivided out between different sectors. So you'll see here a large portion of our solar growth here in the state has really been attributed to utility scale solar. And actually, at one point in time, North Carolina grew to become number 2 in installed solar in the country. That growth has slowed down a little bit. We now have been surpassed by Texas and Florida, and have some work to do on that end. But as you can see on these charts, on this chart right here, that the piece of the pie that's comprised of rooftop solar is growing pretty substantially, actually, when you look at year over year. And that directly goes back to the chart that Emily shared earlier, showing that growth in rooftop solar. So while it's still a relatively smaller piece of the overall solar picture, I think there are a lot of opportunities in front of us for more of this behind the meter customer installed technology. And as Emily had mentioned we're at about a 1% penetration rate here in North Carolina. So we've got a lot of work to do. One other piece that I'll quickly highlight is that the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association also tracks all of the solar installations across the state as well via our renewable energy database. So I shared a link there so you can actually geolocate where all of these projects are and see a lot of these utility scale projects, but even down to the residential level. I think in general, kind of getting to the point of lots of opportunities in front of us here in North Carolina, teeing off of some of Emily's comments, there are a lot of different incentives and rebates available to customers who are looking to install solar. So now there's now there's no better time than now to install solar here in the state. And so I share the screen here with a couple of resources that I always direct folks to as well, for different incentives and rebates that are available, including the database for state incentives for renewables and efficiency, which is hosted by our partners at the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, outlining all of those different incentives and rebates that are available, and a new website that recently was rolled out called Energy Funds for All, which outlines all the various IRA incentives that are available to customers. And then, of course, checking in with the local utilities. So I included Duke Energy's logo here, but for customers across the state of North Carolina that fall outside of Duke Energy territory, always checking in with their co-ops or municipal utilities to figure out what sort of incentives or programs are available to help accelerate the transition to clean energy is really important. So speaking of one of those incentives, I want to take a moment to spotlight a recently approved incentive program by the North Carolina Utilities Commission called Power Pair. So this program was just approved about a month ago and is set to go into effect and will be eligible for customers to start enrolling around May. And so this incentive is pretty significant. So you can see in the green text at the very top here that new customers who install solar and storage will be eligible for up to a $9,000 rebate. And by some estimates, that could knock off almost 30% of the total upfront cost of installing solar and storage moving forward. Then you factor that on top of the 30% investment tax credit that's available via the Inflation Reduction Act. It's, now's a better time, the best time really to install solar, and it's incredibly cost effective given all of these various incentives and rebates that are available. So I won't necessarily walk through all of the various pieces of this incentive program, but you can see there's a component that's specifically tied to solar and a component specifically tied to batteries, along with a ongoing incentive that will be available for customers after they enroll that can provide them up to something to the effect of $60-something a month should they elect to allow the utility to be able to control their batteries during peak load events throughout the course of the year to help offset the need for peaker fossil fuel plants. And so this is a really, really appetizing incentive program for customers who are considering going solar moving forward. A couple of other sort of things that I want to point out, right? So while we have a lot of really great incentives available to customers, there are still some challenges, right? And some policy issues that we need to still continue to work through here within the state. And I just want to, draw attention to some of the issues around HOA restrictive covenants that we have in place here in North Carolina, which have been a real challenge for a number of customers who have been considering and interested in solar for some time. By some estimates, 40 to 50% of all homes in the state of North Carolina are governed by an HOA. And HOAs, although we've passed a solar access law back in 2007 that prevents HOAs from outright denying solar, they still can restrict the placement of the solar system on a roof. And so that makes it somewhat financially difficult to move forward with installing a system if you're placing your system on the south or the north facing side of your home, in which you're not going to see the most optimal production. So we still have some issues to address around HOAs. We still have some issues to address around being able to allow customers to participate in new financing models like leasing. North Carolina is the only state in the country with a solar leasing cap. And so we've got some issues there. And so those are the types of things that we'll be thinking about at the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. And I know Environment NC will also be thinking about as well as we go into the upcoming legislative session and beyond that. And I always like to point folks to a resource that we put together here at NCSEA, which is called the Consumer Guide to Solar Electricity for the North Carolina homeowner. And so the idea there is it's a resource that outlines all the questions that you should be asking of your solar installer as you go through the process, and also includes a link to our solar code of conduct and the businesses that have signed that solar code of conduct. So rest assured, if you decide to install solar and go with any of those installers that are on the list, you can know that they are operating in the best interest of the customer and are installing a system that's going to work great for you and your situation. So with that, I will pass it back on over to Emily. And again, I appreciate the time and opportunity to be here this morning and talk about rooftop solar in North Carolina.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. So if anybody has any questions, we will be ready to field those. I'll just wait a little bit, see if anybody has any questions. But other than that, I put the link to our report in the chat, and if you go to that page, then you'll be able to see on the left-hand side, there's a area to download the report, but there's also sort of like a interactive tool on that page as well.
Emily, can I ask you a question just from the Environment NC perspective?
Yeah.
Related to, so what do you foresee as some of the biggest opportunities in the North Carolina rooftop solar market moving forward?
So I think that, kind of like I said, I think that working on getting solar more accessible to people who may not be homeowners, because I think there's a large portion of North Carolina who are not homeowners. I'm not a homeowner, so I understand not being able to make those kinds of choices that other people can make in installing solar panels and using that energy. So I really think that building out solar accessibility would be really important through like community solar programs and stuff like that, just to like get up to that a little bit closer to 99%. Yeah, I think that'd be really important.
It's a great point. And to that point, you know, we've seen in North Carolina very little community solar offerings. There have been a few in electric co-op territory and municipal territory throughout the state. Some of the utilities that come to mind right away include Roanoke Cooperative up in northeastern North Carolina and Fayetteville Public Works Commission. And both of them have offered some really, really exciting community solar programs that have seen some significant uptake. But when it relates back to Duke, which is our largest utility here in North Carolina, you know, at one point in time, they were offering a community solar program, but the financials associated with the program were not great. So you didn't see any developers bid into the program at all. Hence, no community solar program. But I think, to your point, that will be a very big opportunity for us moving forward, because we do have so many renters and folks that don't own homes in North Carolina that are hungry for, you know, clean energy programs that are available to them. There are very few options right now. There's the Renewable Advantage program, in which it's a premium program in which you're paying for RECs that may be invested outside of the state of North Carolina, but it will be really important for us to offer programs that allow us to invest in solar projects that are right here in our backyard and ensuring the electrons delivered onto the grid are being consumed by consumers right here, and that we're helping to continue to improve the overall emissions reductions here in the state and meeting our overall emissions reduction targets of 70% by 2030.
Yeah, awesome. Really well stated. I think we have a question here for you. Emily Rush is asking, in some states, we are working on streamlining the permitting process. Is that something you think is needed here?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the biggest challenges that we hear from when it comes to solar installers in North Carolina, especially solar installers that are operating across the state, is that in every jurisdiction that they're operating within, there are different rules and permitting processes, which makes it really, really challenging for them to stay on top of, and also ensure that it's an expedited process for the consumer, because, you know, the consumer is really interested after they sign the dotted line to be able to install solar and start producing electrons as soon as they possibly can. So Yeah, I think there are some opportunities here to continue to help accelerate the permitting process. We have seen, some success in some jurisdictions that have adopted technologies like the DOE's solar app, which allows municipalities to enroll in a virtual permitting process, which has greatly accelerated the permitting process overall. But I think, until we get to that point where every AHJ or jurisdiction has adopted that sort of app, creating some standards for permitting, I think would be easy, would really help some of these installers who are operating in a lot of different areas across the state of North Carolina.
Thank you again to Matt. He was a really great guest on this, and yeah, thanks for all your questions, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Emily. This was so great. Thanks for putting this on as well.